So, welcome everyone to the January LA Jews for Peace uh, monthly Zoom, and we have a very important topic to talk about today: Syria, and we have an expert, a Syrian, Hussam Ayloush, to talk about it. And there are other Syrians here, like Samir, on the call, uh, to, and so
Hi, everybody.
this should be very interesting. Uh, 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 the events in Syria where uh, who the dictator of over 50 years was overthrown was absolutely amazing, uh, and we're very anxious to see how this will all play out. The other big news, of course, is the ceasefire in Gaza, but that is much smaller news, really. That was expected, because every war ends, and I'll just say that the so far the truce is going well. There have been three Israeli hostages released, 90 Palestinian hostages, 630 trucks got in today. Unfortunately, the settlers are rampaging on three Palestinian villages in the West Bank. First of all, I want to welcome all our extra guests today and let them know that we meet each month on the third Monday of the month, and they're welcome to join us at any time. When they asked me for the link for today, I gave them the link, but I didn't put them on my mailing list. So if you want to be on our mailing list for future announcements, please send me an email and I will send it right back to you. I will put you on the list. Our speaker today is Hussam Ayloush, who's an engineer. So I really think it's really great because I'm a scientist, engineer. But he's more important, a lifelong human rights and democracy activist for many causes here and abroad. He's the executive director of the Greater Los Angeles CARE, Council for American Islamic Relations. He's been very active in the Syrian American Council in Orange County in LA. He's been in he's been active in standing up for Syrians in the federal government. He was part of the group that challenged Trump's Muslim ban 4 years ago, and I'm afraid that he's going to have to do that again now. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor. I'm going to, first of all, stop this sharing. I'm going to turn the floor over to Hussam, and I'm going to ask him to start by saying a few words about CARE, and then carry on as he sees fit. At the end, we'll have a Q&A, of course, and we'll moderate it together. Hussam.
Thank you, Jeff. Great seeing everybody. Good evening. What I guess a momentous time we live in today. I mean, you mentioned the amazing, great news of the ceasefire. And I know it sounds like little, as you said, in light of what's happening in Syria and all of that, but it's certainly a major event, obviously, after 15 months of genocidal war on the Palestinians. So seeing the bloodshed ending and hopefully seeing all prisoners, all hostages be able to return home is certainly something that brings some ease. Obviously, the bigger situation, the bigger problem remains: the occupation, the apartheid, the dehumanization of Palestinians remains, and that's a whole different issue that needs to be addressed. Again, I mean, that is the root cause of the problem, as I know all of you have been spending your time, your life, your efforts addressing and advocating for freedom and an end to that war there and the occupation. But also today is the inauguration of Trump again, as you alluded to, Jeff, with the Muslim ban possibly coming back, unfortunately, and kind of reminds us of things to happen in the Middle East. What will happen, knowing the history of Trump and a lot of the uncertainty on the double talk that he does and what drives him, etc. So yes, we keep that in mind. Please let me know, Jeff, how long do I have so I can kind of shape my,
A-
schedule.
Anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, whatever you feel like doing.
All right, perfect. I'll try to limit. I mean, obviously, this is a big topic that could go on for hours. Not that I was planning for hours at all, but just good to because I would love to get some time for the Q&As. The questions and answers are the best part because that's what we address, what's on people's mind. So before I get into the topic, I'll talk a little bit about CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. CARE is the largest American Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. It was set up over 30 years ago, back in 1994. So this year will be our 31st year in operation, with offices and chapters in most major cities where there is a large Muslim presence. I've had the honor of being part of CARE, especially CARE California and CARE Los Angeles, since the inception of CARE in Southern California. I had the honor. Uh, I'm an aerospace engineer. I finished school UT Austin, left Austin, came to California in the hope that I will continue my career as an aerospace engineer here. I worked for 5 years in the industry. And then I got to know about CARE, learned about the work they do. I helped start the local chapter along with a couple of activists, joined the first board. Eventually, the board kind of brainwashed me and convinced me to quit my engineering job and take on the executive director position, which I've been very, very happy that I did. It had been a lifelong of activism, meeting great people, working with people like yourselves. I've known many of you, Jeff is one of them. Of course, Vicky, a dear sister, Esti, another dear sister. I see some of the names here. Samir, lifelong friend, activist, etc. So many of you, and I see a lot of the other names here. Claudia. So this is the beauty of doing that part of CARE. So CARE's focus is empowering American Muslims, engaging them, ensuring we get the Muslim community engaged in the political system as people who are informed, activated, running for office, but also defending the rights of Muslims, the civil rights, religious rights specifically, and building bridges of collaboration and partnerships with like-minded groups and communities. So we work very, very closely with Latino groups, immigrants' rights groups, African American, Black groups, Asian American, Jewish American. JVP is a ST is here, one of our closest allies, friends on a personal level, personally, but also of CARE nationwide. And we've had the chance to work with them everywhere else. Of course, LA Jews for Peace for many, many years, and so on and so forth. So the goal is to bring together our common goals, common values, and advance what we believe is important for us here and abroad. CARE is mostly domestic, so our focus is mostly, for the most part, domestic. We get pulled into obviously the situation in the Middle East and in Palestine, mostly because that occupation is funded through our tax money, and it has a lot of implications and impact on the livelihood of Muslims or people perceived as Muslims in America, such as students who rally or participate in activities against the apartheid or in support of Palestinians and so on. So that is in general what CARE is. I will get into myself. I've been with CARE, as I said, since the beginning. I'm the son of Syrian parents. Both of my parents are of Syrian origin, with actually some Turkish ethnicity. So, for a full disclosure, in case we're going to talk a little bit about Turkey. My ethnicity, my national origin never stops me from saying what I believe is important to be said. I'm not tribal. Those who know me know very well. I probably cannot visit two-thirds of the Arab countries because I will be arrested in most of them because I speak up against what I believe is human rights violations. But I was born in Lebanon. My parents left Syria a long time ago, especially from my dad's side, because when the coup happened, when the Syrian regime took over, it made it difficult for people who had a different view. So I lived in Lebanon until I was 18, and then I left to the US to pursue my college education. And
So just to understand, which coup you're talking about, the Assad father?
the Assad father, actually a little bit before that, the Ba'ath
Before,
Party, which we're going to talk about it. The Ba'ath,
1963
the 1963 Ba'ath Party
coup.
coup, exactly. What claimed to be a nationalist, socialist party, which I don't believe they implemented anything socialist or anything Arab nationalist. It was pretty much a bunch of corrupt military officers, and we're going to talk about Syria, so we'll put that in that context probably immediately, so not to waste any of your time with that. So with that said, Syria has always been. I never lived in Syria. I visited Syria to visit my grandparents, my relatives, but I've never lived for a long time in Syria more than as a visitor. But I've always been fascinated by the rich history of that country, the rich culture and diversity of it. I've heard stories from my parents who went to school there, lived there, were born and raised there, about living in a country with such a rich history, diversity in ethnicity, religion. As someone who grew up, and I met many of my parents' friends. Literally, they were Christian, they were Kurdish, they were Jewish, Armenian, because that was how Syria was for many, many decades. Syria is one of the oldest countries in the world, actually, according to many experts. Syria has two of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. They say, historians debate between Aleppo and Jericho, Ariha, but they say Aleppo is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the entire world.
Damascus.
And the same experts say Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited capital of the world also. So, whether it's the oldest or the second oldest, doesn't matter, but this is the place. This is the birthplace of civilizations that happen. So Syrians tend to be very proud of their culture. This is where the alphabet started. This is where music started. This is where a lot of religious faith backgrounds thrived and lived. When we talk about Muslim, Jewish, Christian faith background specifically, we all trace a lot of that heritage in that region. The largest greater Syria area, if we want to go that. But if you can't be a Christian without talking about Damascus. You can't be, again. So all of that is well known to many of you. So it's an area where people take a lot of pride. It lived under various rules from the Romans, the Byzantines, later on, all the way to the Ottomans, who ruled over Syria for over 400 years until the French came over, after World War I, and there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the Ottoman Empire was divided into various, like 1916. The Ottoman Empire divided that region that was ruled, especially the Arab part of the Ottoman Empire was divided into different countries, including Palestine, Syria, Jordan, North Africa, and Lebanon, etc., carving out different countries, sometimes in the most random of ways, dividing tribes and dividing cities between countries. So you have families divided between Jordan and Syria, and you have families divided between Lebanon and Syria. You have families divided between Iraq and Kuwait, between Iraq and Syria, and so on. So it was pretty random. Now, if people are familiar with the colonialist, imperialist actions of France and the UK and Britain, the two Sykes-Picot signers, it was intentional. This was part of the deliberate ensuring of instability in that region, enough to allow them to keep intervening and interfering in the affairs of these countries. Let alone what happened later on with the Balfour, agreement, and then the partition, and so on and so forth. Now, once Syria was formed as a country, historians say Syria actually was on track of being very democratic, and it continued to be for decades. With some instability, but they had a parliament where a multi-party system existed. Muslims, Christians, Armenians, Kurdish, Arabs, lived harmoniously, like in any other place, tension, political tension, but pretty much in a very positive way until the first coup that happened in 1963. And I'm glad Samir is here. He can correct me about messing up any of the dates. But in 1963, the Ba'ath Party, the Ba'ath means the Renaissance, the Arab Renaissance Socialist Party, led a coup through its military officers and forced the constitution to be on hold and invoked martial law in Syria, restricting the parliaments, restricting a lot of the freedoms, free press, freedom to organize politically, and it turned Syria into one party system. So the only party that was allowed in Syria was the Ba'ath Party, and it was a very totalitarian regime. Somebody asking a question. Well, not for me, I guess. So it turned it into a totalitarian regime. In 1971, so a few years after that, one of the Ba'ath Party members, and that is Hafiz al-Assad, the father of Bashar Assad, led the coup and took over actually executed and imprisoned or exiled a lot of his partners, Ba'ath partners, took over and turned Syria into a one-family ruled totalitarian regime where they control everything. 1970 or 71, I think the debate.
No,
yes,
70.
70 exactly. Yeah. So they turned the country into a one family rule where they control, and they happen to be from a minority religious sect community that is mostly present in the northwest part of Syria, the coastal part of Syria, the mountainous area to be exact, near the coast. It's a minority called the Alawites or the Nusayris. Alawites is an offshoot of Shia Islam. They're not Shia, but one of the offshoots. Now, why is that important? Is because they relied on their own community to rule Syria. So within very few years, every main position in Syria, especially military, economic, and political, was appointed from that community, sidelining all other communities slowly but surely. The Syrian regime, the Assad regime, played on fear tactics, divide and conquer, basically playing every community against the other, scaring the Kurds from the Arabs, scaring the Arabs from the Kurds, scaring the Christians from the Sunnis, scaring the Druze from the Sunnis, and vice versa, to make sure that everybody lived in fear, and no free speech existed, no free press existed, no freedom of religion existed. Syria claimed to be a secular, socialist, Arab nationalist country, but ideology was not an issue. Syria was run as a mafia. One country, one family with a lot of people who benefited, opportunistic people from all walks of life. So there were Sunni corrupt people, Christian corrupt people, Armenian, Kurdish, Arabic, Alawis, and there was the ruling family and their friends, and a lot of people who benefited from that corruption. But everybody else, including people in the suburbs, people from smaller cities, farmland, were slowly but surely marginalized, suppressed, and imprisoned. Anybody who had a different opinion would disappear in prison. I know if you didn't live in Syria, it's hard to imagine, but imagine when you read about what is happening in China or North Korea. And that is exactly how it was in Syria. People lived in fear. And when we would visit my relatives in Syria, you could feel that fear. Because Lebanon, relatively speaking, enjoyed some democracy, free press, free election. In Syria, there were no free election. President Assad, the father, would win through these fake elections with 99% of the vote, supposedly. And he continued that until his son. When the father died in year 2000, his son, Bashar al-Assad, was appointed in again, almost like a hereditary rule. There was no choice. Basically, he was positioning his other son, Basil, the eldest, to be the president, but he died in a car accident. So when he was about to die, Assad was getting sick, ill. He worked, with a circle of power to make sure that his son, Bashar al-Assad, who was studying at that time in England, London, going to, medical school for, optometry and he was called back into Syria when his father was getting ill. And basically, even the constitution was amended within 20 minutes because the constitution required that the president be minimum age of 40 years old. Bashar was, I forgot,
34.
34, I guess my number was good. They amended the constitution to make it where his president can be 34-year-old. They didn't say 30, they said 34 exactly. So he was appointed president, and I would say very quickly, the people of Syria did feel some hope because he came, he studied in a Western country, he married into a Sunni lady from a city called Homs in Syria. So they felt, okay, maybe he won't be as sectarian, as brutal, as bloody as his father. He's going to come and open a new page. And he did make some promises. He told Syrians, I will open a new page. I'm going to allow some freedom. I'm going to release some political prisoners. By then, there were tens of thousands of political prisoners, most of the times untracked. You can find them, you can locate them, you can visit them. So he started allowing for some freedom. But very soon, the old guards around the regime made it very difficult and made it clear for him that this is not the place. Syria cannot be ruled with that because of many reasons. Again, the mafia that runs the show, the fear that there are a minority running over Syria, whatever the reasons, maybe it's just a culture that can't be changed. Maybe he was never sincere about it. I don't know. But all I know, it didn't last. That Syria Spring, as they called it, or Damascus Spring,
2005.
did not work very well. Now, this was around 2000. An important thing happened in 2011. Something called in the West, or sometimes even in the Middle East, the Arab Spring. What is the Arab Spring? The Arab Spring is, remember, Syria is not the only dictatorship in the region. Actually, if anything, almost every Arab country is ruled under a dictatorship by corrupt authoritarian rulers, either royal or fake republics. But Syria was the most brutal. I mean, I would say Syria and Iraq, until the fall of Saddam Hussein, were among the most of the brutal regimes. With the fall of the Saddam Hussein, it was Syria on top of the list. Gaddafi is pretty brutal, but relatively speaking, much less than Assad because it's a smaller country and he had solid power over the country. Plus, there was enough oil to make up some of that brutality, right? Like provide something in return. Again, not to praise Gaddafi, equally terrible, brutal dictator. But what happened in 2011? What is it?
He's far from Israel.
And he's far from Israel. That's a very good, important point. That makes him less important to the Middle East and policymakers. That's very important. We'll talk a little bit about Israel. Israel in the region prefers these Arab dictatorships because it's so much easier to handle dictators whose only concern is to build an army to fight the people, not Israel or anybody else. So it's much easier not to have to worry about people's public opinion because, if you have a Sisi or a Mubarak or Assad, what are they busy with? Certainly not supporting the Palestinians, usually suppressing their own people. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So in 2011, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and the first rallies on the street demanding an end of the regime, or the end, Isqat al-Nizam, to bring down the regime, as they called it. Pretty soon after that, we witnessed the same thing happening on the streets of Libya, then Egypt, then Yemen, and Syrians started thinking, can we do the same? A group of young kids in the city of Dar'a, southern part, desert area of Syria, wrote on the wall, it is your turn, you doctor, because he called himself Dr. Bashar, it is your turn now, basically, demanding an end of the regime on the wall. Of course, the family, the governor of Dar'a, who was a relative of Assad, could not tolerate that, arrested these young kids, tortured them in the most inhumane way. When the families, when the tribal leaders of that region came, met with the governor and said, these are kids, teenagers. He said, forget about them, go and make new kids. That's literally what he told them. And if you cannot make kids, send us your wives and we'll make kids for you. You forget those kids. They ever existed. They were raped, they were tortured, their nails were pulled, and so on. That led, this was a very tribal area of Syria. That led the tribes to demonstrate on the street. The regime responded immediately with heavy weaponry, with shooting on them. Many were killed, wounded. Very soon, in many other parts of Syria, in Damascus, in Homs, in many other parts, timid demonstrations went on the street, calling for the reform of the regime. Syrians were not as brave as Tunisians and Libyans and Egyptians. They didn't ask for the end of the regime. They said reform, meaning allow us some political freedom, release some of the prisoners. The regime responded with the utmost brutality, no mercy, and started arresting all those who organized these peaceful protests. These protests were entirely peaceful on the side of the protesters, entirely. Actually, they all prided themselves of doing nonviolent trainings. Put roses, hold roses, calling out in every chant, this is peaceful, silmiya, silmiya. But the regime responded in the most brutal of ways, arresting a lot of the protest leaders, torturing them to death, and eventually started punishing more and more of the cities where these protests are happening. Slowly but surely, some of the soldiers, these are conscripts who were forced to, drafted usually. They didn't want to kill their own people.
Yeah. So it went on for 6 months peaceful.
For 6 months. 6 months, no violence whatsoever. So for 6 months, it got more brutal on the side of the government, and they would videotape that. I mean, you can go on YouTube and you will see some of the most horrific. I wouldn't advise you, honestly. It will traumatize you. The torture to death, basically, stabbing to death, skinning of people alive, videotaping the rape of prisoners, and then putting it and sending it to the families. These are all documented by all human rights organizations, not just Syrians, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and others. And then eventually some of these soldiers started defecting because they don't want to kill their own families and hiding in their own villages. And then more and more of these people started defecting. The regime used more brutality. And eventually the world started complaining because those images are out there. The regime wanted to send a message that we're here fighting terrorists who are foreign funded. They're not Syrians. So that was the regime's claim. These are not Syrians. These are all fake images being produced by Qatar and Al Jazeera, funded by Israel. Literally, that's exactly what he was saying. This is all an Israeli conspiracy, CIA conspiracy. These are not Syrians. And these are all Muslim terrorists coming from Al-Qaeda and others. These are not Syrians, because they want to destabilize. That is his slogan. They want to destabilize Syria because Syria is the heart of the resistance and the support of the Palestinians, which we'll come back to that. Complete nonsense. There is no Arab government that has harmed the Palestinian cause more than the Syrian regime of Assad. But that's a whole different story. So,
and also the number of the protesters were like 500,000 in city Homs, 500,000 in the city of Hama. And that was in the first 6 months, and it was witnessed by the American ambassador and the French ambassador. They went to Hama and Homs because the regime trying to put it down and shoot everybody, and they witnessed that.
Exactly.
That was,
and it's on videos. You can go and watch.
Yes.
You can search the videos of the revolution, the Syrian revolution, of the dates. Look for, it started in March of 2011. You can look for April, May, and you will see literally hundreds of thousands. It's very popular. And I'll tell you, I have nothing but respect for the Syrian people, because they know if you peacefully protest in Syria, the punishment is death, and is not merciful death. It is torture to death. So for people to do that, knowing what the price might be, not just imprisonment. I mean, I have relatives who were imprisoned. Samir will tell you about relatives killed, tortured, missing.
my
still,
brother, my youngest brother.
including his brother, of course. So, and yet, eventually what the regime did, and that was very important, in around 2012, the regime, Bashar Assad, started releasing some of the people he had arrested who have gone to fight in Iraq, some of the groups that belong to Al-Qaeda, some of the known jihadi fighters, with the hope that if we arm them, in his mind, if I arm them, they will turn the revolution from being peaceful, non-violent, to an armed revolution, with that appearance of a religious Islamic revolution. Then it will lose its popularity, and the West will not complain, because the West is pretty much well known to care less about human rights if it's deemed that this is, these are all quote unquote Islamists. So we saw, Syrians at that time started organizing the people who were participating in the peaceful revolution in what's known, and defecting from the army, forming groups such as the Free Syrian Army. The Free Syrian Army was really not a unified structured group. Basically, it was loosely a group of people in every town and every village, and they would call themselves the Free Syrian Army. They will defect with whatever their personal weaponry might be, an AK-47, and form little groups to protect their neighborhood. No heavy weaponry, no tanks, no airplanes, nothing at that time. And then slowly we started seeing militias forming with Islamic, names, run by people who were released from prison, from the Assad prisons. These are people, Syrians who had fought in Iraq. The Syrian, under US pressure, had arrested them. They started forming, and they started getting popular too, I have to admit. The reason for that is because they were also succeeding in protecting the villages, and sometimes even countering with attacks against regime forces. And the regime was okay with it, losing some of these draftees fighting against those militias, because it helped the narrative to show that this is, you see, we told you, these are foreign fighters, Islamists, jihadists, etc. Eventually, I'm going to go a little bit faster for the interest of time. Eventually, it escalated. Tons of groups were formed. The regime around 2000, in early days, the regime, keeping in mind, because of its sectarian nature, it has always been an ally of the Iranian government. Iran sees itself as a Shia Muslim government in a sea of Sunni governments and people in the region. So having an ally like Assad was strategic. So the Iranian government, from early days, from the early part of the revolution in 2011 even, and in early 2012 for sure, sent thousands of military trainers and equipment and military weapons, basically, to support the regime, and ordered its militias, the Iranian funded militias, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also Shia groups from Iraq, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, started funding them as mercenaries to go and keep the regime afloat. And they committed some of the worst massacres against entire neighborhoods and communities. Again, in the name of, under very sectarian slogans. This is about avenging the death of the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad 1400 years ago, because of the political debate that happened at that time. Something that Syrian had nothing to do with anything. So you had sectarian elements getting into the process, but the regime was desperate at that time because the regime was losing ground and popularity. So it needed those foreign fighters. At the same time, the Syrians were getting better organized because they were getting also some support from various countries at that time. Some with good intentions, some not with such good intentions. I would say from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, from Qatar, from Turkey. And each one had their own agenda, because there's a conflict that exists also, competition between the Arab regimes, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE on one side, and Qatar on the other side. Also, UAE is afraid that if the Assad regime falls, there might be some democratic government in Syria that might have Islamic leanings, something the UAE does not tolerate, certainly not a democracy. Also, Turkey is afraid if Syria disintegrates, then the Kurdish minority in Syria, which constitute about 10% of Syria, might form its own independent state and seceding state, which will impact the large Kurdish minority in Turkey, which, is many of it, much part of that is organized under the PKK, the Workers' Party, the Marxist Workers' Party in Turkey. So Every country had its affair. Plus, keeping in mind, Turkey sees itself as the guardian of that region because of the Ottoman Empire's history. So for 500 years, that region was one. Turks, Syrians, Lebanese, many Iraqis, intermixed. You will hardly find a Syrian family anywhere in middle to northern Syria which doesn't have Arabic, Kurdish, Turkish mixed in themselves because of the intermixing. These are for centuries. We're not talking about invading armies. I mean, these are people who've lived together for literally over 1400 years together. They're all also happen to be Muslim and specifically Sunni. So there is that geography, politics, demographics that come in together. Also, the government in Turkey does have, ambitions, political ambitions in the region, in competition with the Israeli ambitions, and on the other hand, with the Iranian ambitions. So there's the axis of competition that exists over the region between these three regional superpowers: Israel, Iran, and Turkey. And Arab countries tend to be followers of either one of these governments. None of them is strong enough to create its own axis in that sense. So with that said, the battle went on. Syrian rebels almost took over Damascus around 2013, I mean. Damascus was surrounded with rebels. The northern part was taken over. The southern part, Daraa, Deir ez-Zor, it's all the
70%. 70% of Syria was liberated.
Under the rebels' control. The regime controlled the coastal area, the center of Damascus, the center of Aleppo, Hama, and so on. Now, what happened at that moment? Iranians have already sent the militias, sent the weapons, but that was not enough. So it reached out to Russia, another patron of the regime. The regime is considered to be, from the days of the Soviet Union, the regime has always kept a very close relationship with the Soviet Union and then with Russia. Putin considers Syria an important strategic location, overseeing obviously the Mediterranean, where it has a naval base, but also various air bases and economic, political relationship with the regime. So Russia came in full force, bringing in its air force in 2015. 2015, yeah, 2015. And bringing in its, the air force, which was very brutal, extremely brutal, destroying complete towns and cities, murdering tens of thousands. I mean, you can imagine what we watched, the brutality we watched in Gaza. That was the way it is in most cities that were controlled by the rebels. Most cities were wiped out exactly the same way, killing, at the end, by the end of that wave, you're talking about at least 600,000 Syrians were murdered, mostly obviously civilians. 13 million Syrians, more than half, 60% of the population, total population being 23 million, was displaced, turned into refugees or displaced, internally displaced people. Most people, and it was mostly of one group, the Sunnis. The Sunni Arabs of Syria were forced into being refugees. And there was a stalemate in the region until only a couple of months ago, to be specific, November 22nd. By then, rebels have lost most of their territory, almost everything except the northern part of Syria, in a city called Idlib, and the region close to the border with Turkey. 1/4 of Syria continues to be run by US-supported Syrian Democratic Forces, which is an offshoot or an extension of the PKK, the Turkish Kurdish, basically PKK. It continues to run much of the northeast, all the way close to the south of that area, including heavily Arab regions, not just Kurdish. That includes Samir's, homeland area, the area of Deir ez-Zor, Qamishli,
100% Arab, Sunni, Muslim.
Sunni. So. But it's mostly funded through the US, because the US, this is an area that is rich in oil, and the US wanted to have a stake in what's happening in Syria and some pressure against Turkey and so on. So the rebels on November 22nd of last year launched a quick campaign, military campaign, with the goal of pushing the regime's military into more away from that area, because they were, constant bombardment. They wanted to push it away out of the range, maybe reaching close to the suburbs of Aleppo in the north. But by then, the regime's military had been disintegrated because of the corruption. The regime had been mostly focused on distribution of drugs, Captagon and drugs in the region. They actually ran the show in the entire Middle East because of corruption, because of the, almost, since 2011, almost 15 years almost of the war. The regime didn't have that control anymore. And by then, the two main allies of the regime were completely weakened. Iran was beaten up badly in what happened in Lebanon, because of Hezbollah, which is the proxy of Iran, was completely crushed. It had to pull out its forces from Syria, which were protecting most of the cities for the regime. They had to withdraw into Lebanon because they were being targeted also, and they needed the force. Iran couldn't provide the support out of fear to be dragged into the war, because most of their top leaders were assassinated in Syria by Israel, including the heads of the Republican Guards, the Revolutionary Guards, I mean, and their ambassador and so on. And Russia, the other patron, was, is completely weakened due to its war in Ukraine. So this created a window of opportunity for the rebels to launch their campaign and liberate part of Aleppo and northern Syria. But it was so easy, they decided to continue one city after the other, and then eventually from Aleppo to Hama, Homs, and then on December 8th, they reached Damascus. By then, the news was out that Assad had fled to Moscow, and the rebels, led by a coalition of groups, led by one of the groups, but it's a coalition of militias under the main leadership of what's known as the HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or Hayat Tahrir Syria. Basically, it's the Association for the Liberation of Sham, Syria, which is an offshoot of al-Nusra, Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the al-Qaeda branch in Syria, but with some disagreement, that the head of it, known at that time as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, had some disagreement with al-Qaeda's mission, which was a global mission of jihad, and his argument was, this is not our battle is in Syria, we want to liberate Syria. And plus some of their actions that happened, including some sectarian targeting that happened in Iraq and other areas, where he expressed his disagreement and targeting of civilians. So he split up from Jabhat al-Nusra, changed the name to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, ruled that region of Damascus, of Syria, the northern part of Syria, for several years, establishing security and
since
a process of government.
2017.
2017. So 7 years of stability in that region. I have to admit, I was not I'm not a fan of HTS at that time. I mean, for me, I was more into the other groups where we're a little bit more diverse. But I have to say,
Army.
The Free Syrian Army, basically, or the Free National Army, or the National Syrian Army, depending on the names. But I have to also say, to admit, I'm pleasantly surprised by the way they've conducted themselves since they've ruled over entire Syria. They have shown themselves to be inclusive. They have shown themselves to be very organized, not vengeful. They have established order, rule and order, a lot of freedom. I can say now safely, Mr. Ahmed al-Shara is his actual real name. His nom de guerre is the al-Julani, which refers to the area where his family is originally from, the Golan Height, Julan, the Syrian Golan Height occupied by Israel. Anyway, I mean, they have shown themselves to be actually pretty respectful and inclusive of Syria's diversity. The language has been very welcoming. They have not engaged in sectarian killing, vengeful killing. They have insisted on the rule of law. even as they liberated the dungeons. Many of you have seen the dungeons. Syria has more dungeons than universities. And
Yes, like
200,
Said
Sednaya, you watch Sednaya, Al-Mazza, Adra,
Palmyra.
dozens and dozens, Tadmur, all of these prisons that used to exist in Syria, where 200,000 at least people were detained. Over the years, millions of Syrians have entered these prisons. There is no family in Syria that hasn't lost somebody in these prisons. And when you go in, you disappear. Most people, I mean, out of the 200,000 that were taken by the regime over the last many years, only a few thousand, less than 10,000 were recovered. The rest are presumed dead. Many tortured to death. Their families sometimes don't know where they're at. And whoever survived, if you've seen their images, most of them have lost memory. They don't know who they are, what their name is. Many of the women are leaving prison, have left prison with babies, with children that they were raped, in the prisons. It is terrible. I mean, what we've witnessed is terrible.
And Kaiser
Yeah, I mean, the
picture.
Kaiser, the
Kaiser
pictures
photos.
were leaked, from Sednaya, where tens of thousands of images of people. The regime, like the Nazis, the regime took pride in documenting everything they do, which is kind of weird. It's sickening, but actually they do. They have the best archiving system you could imagine. They archived everybody. They have it, obviously not to the families, to themselves. And of course, everybody who dies is usually described as death through heart attack. Everybody is a heart attack. And of course, if you look at the body, no nails, no eyes, they remove their eyes. They trade with their organs. This is all documented now and is being out slowly but surely. So now Syrians are relieved. They're hopeful. We don't know what's next. I will conclude with 2 minutes now very quickly. In terms of the threats we're witnessing today, Syria today, I was getting to say that Syrians, people who live in Syria, basically, because not only Syrians live in Syria, there are Palestinians, there are others, but people who live in Syria today, majority of our Syrians, are the only Arabs with freedom in the entire region. So to just put things in perspective, meaning in 22 other Arab countries, people cannot criticize their government, cannot decide who to vote for, and so on. In Syria, there's that freedom now that's being worked on, to have elections soon, to rewrite the constitution. People are on the street. They don't like something the new government is doing. They're on the street. Nobody has been punished for that. So you can imagine this is very threatening to all the Arab governments, surrounding Arab government, because they don't want to see freedom, because it's contagious. It will take over their regimes. Israel does not want to see a democracy in the region. And this has been a very much proven policy for Israel over the last many decades, because Israel is always worried about a government that is elected by the people. Let me ask you, if Egypt elects a person freely, it only in the history, if in Egypt's 5,000 years history, it only happened once. That was President Mohammed Morsi. And when he was elected, Israel knows whoever is going to be elected in any Arab country is going to be sympathetic to the Palestinian people, is going to be pressuring Israel to end its occupation, and so on and so forth. Israel doesn't want to deal with that. Israel prefers to deal with dictators. And let me add, not only Israel, but also the Western governments, including our own US government. The US has always preferred to deal with dictatorships. It always prefers to deal with the kings of Saudi Arabia, the emirs of UAE, because it's much easier to handle dictators. They can do your bidding without having to worry about a parliament or ramification from the people. And
it's all the superpower. Nobody won.
Exactly. Well said, Gideon. Very, very correct. So yes, Syria is facing a lot of challenge. Turkey is the best friend of the Syrian people, but Turkey has its interests too. Turkey wants to make sure that whichever government is in Syria is going to be a government that will work with it to make sure that there are no fueling of secessionist views for the Kurdish community in Turkey or in Syria. So I'm hopeful that actually Turkey is, I'm hearing rumors, reading that Turkey is in negotiation with leaders of the PKK to come to a ceasefire or an end of the conflict that exists there and where Kurdish people will continue to be engaged in politics in Turkey. So it's a difficult area, but Syrians are more hopeful than they've ever been over the last 60 years. Actually, Syrians today say this is our true independence. We've never seen true independence before. Yeah, with that, I will stop here to allow you for Q&A and comments if need, because I have still a lot to say, but I see hands up, and to be fair, I want to hear from you also.
Thank you very much. That was extremely enlightening. And though Uri has had his hand up, I think I want to let Samir make a first comment.
Well, I mean, it was well said. Hussam did a good job, and I agree with everything he said. That is what we're facing, and today Syria has its first independence, and they raised the same flag they raised in 1946 when they got their independence from France. That same flag now, it's the revolution flag and the flag of Syria. And the Syrians are very happy, and they are expressing themselves in the streets by the thousands. And I have been in contact with my family. My family is very happy, and every Syrian I talk to, friends, whatever, in Syria or outside Syria, they are very happy with the win of the revolution, with this victory. And this is a new page for Syria, and we hope for the better.
Okay, well, thank you, Samir. I see hands up from Uri, Gideon, Claudia, Yossi, and myself. So we'll start off in that order, and we'll start off with Uri.
Thank you very much for your very interesting, enlightening review of the history of Syria, at least in the last 100 years or so. So I was born and raised in Israel. I always heard the other side. You were neighbors, but supposedly the eyes of the Israeli government was always the bad guys. So there's a few points that came to my mind, if you can just talk about them. I remember the United Arab connecting with Egypt, creating the United Arab, what do you call it, the community or something under Nasser. So that's one area that somehow Syria seemed to be different. And then another point that you said, I remember in 1982, the father bombed al-Sham. He killed like 40,000 people just basically because they said boo about him. So that's now there was another thing I remember in the 2013, Hillary Clinton got involved with the whole thing, and she basically said that we're gonna depose him and replace him and do a lot of things. So I thought the Russian got into that. And there's another thing that I remember, that Israel decided to bomb the Syrian nuclear reactor in 2007. And so this is just 4 points that I remember in that history. If you can care to make any comments about it, would be nice.
Sure. I mean, the United Arab government was between when Nasser was in power.
United Arab Republic.
It didn't last long because it was very one-sided, heavy-handed. Remember, Syrians were still living under some kind of a democracy at that time. And when Nasser came, Nasser also, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but Nasser was the kind of the patron of dictatorship and brutality in the region. You know, he introduced what's known as the system of mukhabarat, which is the intelligence agencies with torture, one-party system, and so on. You know, I mean, he did some good for his people, no debate. He built, you know, coming out of a colonialism era and a rule of corruption. But in my opinion, was the beginning of the decline of freedoms in the Arab world. So he imposed some of that on Syrians. Syrians didn't take that very well, and there was a coup that actually led to the splitting back of Syria as independent. So that is certainly the aspect. Samir,
The
you want to say
unity
something?
lasted from 1958 until 1961.
Yeah, 2 years, I remember reading at least. I wasn't
3
born yet.
years. 3 years.
3 years. Yeah. And again, you know, it was a time of rise Arab nationalism in the region. So he is credited with basically building on that, fueling that, because also it was a time of anger as Arabs were watching Palestinians and their rights and their land being suppressed. So, you know, it was a different moment. I mean, from when I talk to my dad, he talks to me about it. You know, he says it has its ups and its downs, but obviously the biggest down is much of the Arab world was impacted. You know, Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Egypt were all impacted, Algeria even, influenced by Nasser's style of government. You know, again, forceful, repressive, spying on people, no freedom, etc. So that's why it wasn't a major part of Syria's history, I would say, in that sense.
No, it was short, only 2 or 3 years.
3 years, basically, as
3
Samir
years.
reminded us. So it was short-lived. And again, Syrians were excited about it. I mean, when you hear from people like my dad, they had a lot of hope because unity, nationalism, and so on. But it didn't last because, again, the corruption, the military. You know, my personal view, you never have, there hasn't been a real success case with the military running a government, a country, because the military people are trained one thing. All they see are nails that need a hammer to hammer them, right? They don't think in a civility or civic way or civil way. They're not thinking about people's views. You know, if you're a soldier, you're trained to kill. Literally, you're a killing machine. Again, good for bad, but you know, that's not how you run a country. You need an army, but I don't think an army has done a good job anywhere in the world running a country for a long time. Sorry, the other items you talked about,
I talked about 1982 al-Hama.
Oh yes, Hama is the beginning of the city of Hama in northern Syria, where again under the sectarian suppression of the regime, where everything in government was being handed almost 80-90%. Remember, the Alawis are anywhere from 7 to 10% of the total population, with Sunnis being almost 80 to 85%. But when the Alawis took over, the Assad family's, you know, religion, they started suppressing the other minorities, especially the Sunni majority. And then, you know, in the army with the humiliation. I mean, Syrians lived as if they were under occupation. You lived, you know, if your loved one are taken, you never know. If you ask about them, you get tortured. And then the city of Hama, some of the people of the city rebelled against the regime, organized against the regime. The regime responded in the most heavy-handed of ways, sending in special forces from air, land, and everywhere, massacring over 40,000 people over a period of a few weeks. And then the people of Hama.
1 month.
1 month. So 4 or 5 weeks, 1 month.
I was there.
He was there. He can. Yeah, I think you were able to smuggle some pictures, which could have killed you.
Yes.
Anyone who spoke about it, anyone who took a picture, was subject to killing because you're not allowed. And the people of Hama and that region in general were treated as criminals, as terrorists, until the fall of the regime. The brunt of the brutality of the regime was directed at the people of Hama and those in other cities that dared to stand by them through peaceful strikes, like in Homs, in Halab, Aleppo, and so on. So yes, it's a brutal history, and I'm trying to be very brief in the answers because I see a lot of hands.
But before that, that's for history, that in 1980, there was a peaceful uprising in Aleppo, in Deir ez-Zor, in Hama, and the Assad regime, Hafez Assad, was really shaken, and he opened fire and arrested thousands and put it down. And that was in 1980. And then 1982, it was restarted again in Hama. And the regime at this time, they surrounded the city, cut water and electricity with, 50,000 of Syrian troops, those special forces, and they bombed the whole city for 1 month. Nobody can enter. Even the media could not go. I remember, I was there, and that some British journalists came. They wanted to go to Hama, and they told them, the Ministry of Information, that if you go to Hama, that's fine. You're on your own. We're not responsible about you. And he got scared, and he returned back to London. I remember that. Nobody, until they wiped out the whole city, killed up more than 40,000 people, and then they opened the city for the Syrians to come and see. It's like a lesson for everybody. If you do like the people at Hama will do the same thing. And when they opened the city, I went there, and I saw that city is completely gone, and the people, it used to be like more than 200,000 people living there, almost just a few hundred left. And everything is destroyed. Mosques, churches, everything in Hama been destroyed. And when I try to take some pictures, my God, from like a mile away, those Secret Service, they came toward me. I almost, got killed. I jumped into the car and I left. And that was my memory, 1982. That was March 1st, 1982, the massacre of Hama.
By the way, Israel used it as an excuse with the War of Lebanon in 1982. They say, what do you want from us? Look at what they do to each other.
I know.
We are the nice guys. Look what they do. We are nice. We give them water. So, in other words, they used it as a very nice excuse because, you see, they're worse than us. So
Exactly.
Okay,
Gideon, your hands up. Gideon?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sam. For me, very enlightening. The number you talked about, I did not hear them before, I have to admit, and I was following what's happening in Syria, but I'm mostly following leftist organization. For some reason, I wonder if you can talk about it. For some reason, they supported Assad. I don't know why. I was following people like Max Blumenthal, Glenn Greenwald, and others, and I saw Breakthrough News, and they completely supported Assad, and they were against the white helmet, which I don't know anymore if they are good or bad, honestly. So I would like you to hear the second question. I was reading in Israel that there is fear right now that the rebel or the impact of the rebellion in Syria will impact Jordan, which they're saying Jordan might be next. So I would like to talk about it. And just a comment, when I grew up in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in my neighborhood, there was a lot of Jewish people from Haleb, which, all of them claimed to be very rich before they came to Israel. I don't know if it's true, but they used to talk about the Jewish community in Haleb that is very rich and diverse and historic with a lot of roots. And I know it's always an interest in hearing about it. Thank you again. That is amazing.
Of course. Thank you, Gideon. I would believe it, actually.
There's a big community of them in New York City, of the Jewish Halabis.
Halabis and Damascus. A lot of Jewish.
Damascus.
Mostly Damascus. The New York ones are Damascus.
Yeah.
I had a chance to meet some of them, and I met some of the Halabi Jewish people from Virginia and Maryland. I would say I would believe it, because Aleppo people in general, regardless of their ethnicity, religious background or ethnicity, tend to be the most industrious of Syria. Like they have the best factories, the best manufacturing, art to craft, and then you add to it, Jewish history of also business in the region. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, every Aleppo person that I know, whether they're Armenian or Arab or Muslim or Shia or Christian or Jewish, they tend to be very good with business. Now,
משפחת Safra, the Safra's family.
exactly, one of the richest, the
One of
Safra
the
family,
richest, yes.
very well known, and
Yes.
and
Yep.
to go back to the first point on the point of the leftist, and this has been Samir and my struggle with so many of the friends we knew, or so-called friends. I honestly lost a lot of respect for many of these people that I've known and worked with over the years, because what I've discovered over the years, and to his credit, Max Blumenthal, who was at that time working for Al-Akhbar newspaper, which is pro-Israel, pro-Syria, pro-Assad, Hezbollah kind of a newspaper, quit the newspaper because he said, I can't be a hypocrite. I see what Assad is doing and I'm out. And then he left. And then suddenly, I guess after a visit to Russia, came back and then suddenly became pro-Assad and started accusing rebels of all being terrorists, foreign terrorists. But I will tell you where the problem is. Yeah. And Greenwald is somebody I considered a friend, actually. I've invited him to speak at a CARE event. And I still like Glenn overall. I'm a little bit disappointed with his lack of clarity and sophistication. He's a good guy. I don't think he's a bad guy. He just sometimes misinformation. Here's where the premise with Western socialists in general, not everybody, but many, there's one litmus test. It is rarely what the Syrians think. It is rarely what the facts are. It is usually, where does the US stand on any conflict? If the US says this is tea, then immediately they say this is not tea. If the US says we like this bottle of water, then their answer is we don't like this bottle of water. Honestly, and I'm not oversimplifying, it seems the way it is in every conflict that I've seen. Not good. That is obviously not good. Talk to the people of Syria and what they say we're anti-imperialist. Well, what Iran was doing in the region is imperialist.
Yes.
So be blind to the race or religion of the wrongdoers. And just because Assad claims to be anti-Israel, let's say he were, and I tell you he's not, but let's say he were, it doesn't mean you can justify what he's doing because he's suddenly standing with the Palestinians. The Palestinian cause is good on its own standing. It is well deserving of our support because it's a noble cause for freedom against occupation. We don't need a dictator to taint it. And let alone the Assad regime was never pro-Palestinian. Actually, until the Gaza, mass murder that happened over the last 15 months, no one has killed more Palestinians than the Assad regimes, father and son, including during the civil war or the revolution of Syria, in the famous Yarmouk refugee camp.
Yes.
Where thousands of Palestinians were murdered, slaughtered, starved to death, including children, in ways that, you're right, Gideon. Israel says, well, they do it to each other. Why? How bad are we, right? In Gaza. That's what Assad did to the Syrian people and the Palestinian people. So, yes, unfortunately, many leftists in America and the rest of the West have either bought, drank the Kool-Aid of Assad being anti-imperialist and socialist. There's nothing socialist about how they run the country. It is the most corrupt, greedy capitalist. It just, you have to happen to belong to the right sect and region to get away with the greedy capitalism that they did.
It's a mafia.
It's a mafia. They run the country as a mafia, purely as a mafia. There is no state, no government, no laws. Everything is a facade in that sense. So that is the response to the aspect of that. Sorry, what was the other point also? The
impact on Jordan. The Israelis
on Jordan, yes. There is no debate.
Jordan,
I'll tell you, there's no debate. Even if it is not intentional, organically, all the people of the region felt hope watching what is happening in Syria, because the Arab people, all the 400 million of them under 22 Arab countries, have been fed through fear and intimidation and terrorism of their own governments that there is no hope for you to change. These people, these governments are going to stay there forever. You better adjust and adapt. whether you live in Jordan, whether you live in Egypt, whether you live in Morocco, etc., etc. So when the Syrian people were able to remove and oust their dictator, yes, people in the region were like, oh, maybe it is possible. You know, Egyptians are saying maybe we shouldn't have been peaceful in our revolution against Mubarak and then the deep state and so on. But there's also another element that is good for you to keep in mind, is that the region itself is diverse. There's no debate. And that is the beauty of that region. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I enjoy going to this part of the world. And I took my kids back in the days and in Lebanon and in Syria to visit one of the oldest churches in the world and take them to synagogues. I just came back last year from Morocco, visited the Jewish neighborhoods, the marketplace, the cemeteries, for me, because it's something to celebrate, because that's the rich history of my people, a people that have always been inclusive, always been celebrating diversity. But the reality also to keep in mind with that diversity, the overwhelming majority of that region is Arab, Muslim, and Sunni. And they've been denied their natural, organic political rights, social rights, religious rights, cultural rights by these governments that most times report to either Israel or the West in general, the superpowers there, in the way they operate. They owe their governments to the protection of the CIA, etc., etc. Again, I don't want to exaggerate, but for the most part. Now, the people of that region are suddenly watching people who look like them, Syrians, who happen to speak Arabic, who happen to be Muslim, enjoy freedom that they don't have in their area. So yes, organically, it's gonna boost some hope, not only in Jordan, because I'm talking here to a group of friends who represent LA Jews for peace, but also in Palestine. I can tell you, the natural extension of the Palestinian people is the Syrian people. Actually, if you sit down with a Syrian person in general, and they will tell you, we don't see that difference. It is only a regional difference, like it's almost like asking a person in California, how different do you see yourself from the person in Washington State or Arizona? Yeah, different state, but it's the same. America.
Actually, in archaeology, and we found it, and that's documented in Ibla tablet, Damascus and Gaza, the oldest cities, 5,000 years ago, civilized centers, 5,000 years ago, documented in Ibla tablets, where I excavated with an Italian expedition in 1973. And we found 17,000 tablets, not just one, not 1,000, 17,000. And that documented the whole ancient world. And that documented
we learned
also,
about it.
yes, the early Semites, that the original early Semites, 5,000 years ago, are the ancient Syrians and Palestinians. Those are the early Semites, before anybody else.
So the point I wanted to make is not a threat, meaning the reinstitution of natural, cultural, religious, social, political rights of the majority of that region. Again, we're talking about 400 plus million Arabs live there. 85%, maybe, Samir, you're better in statistics and demographics, but I would say safely 85 to 90% of them, extending from Morocco all the way west, all the way to Iraq, happen to be, Arabs and Sunnis. So the reinstitution of that right would have some implication on the region, hopefully positive one. I don't think it's going to be it will ease the tension. It will allow, maybe governments to deal with each other with respect, maybe, and understand for Israel, you can't go on suppressing Palestinian rights without some kind of repercussion on the region, because Syrians, I can tell you, their blood is boiling about when they watch their brethren in Palestine being killed. I think besides the people of Gaza, Syrians were the most to celebrate the ceasefire. If you watch every city in Syria over the last 3 days, Syrians are on the street celebrating. They're saying this is our second biggest joy after the fall of Assad. That's how close they feel towards Palestinians.
You don't need to be Palestinian to celebrate the ceasefire.
Of course. Of course, all of. I mean, I'm not Palestinian, and I'm still celebrating.
We celebrate it also.
All of us, of any human being, any person with a good heart and good morals, has to celebrate the end of killing of innocent people.
Okay. Claudia is next, then Yossi, then David Mandel, and then me. So, Claudia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hussam, brother, it's been so nice to listen to you. So honored to hear you. And yeah, so honored to be here with you. I don't even know where to start. And I think some of what was talked about right now in terms of Damascus and Gaza, the archaeology being found, I feel like my questions to you were more leaning towards the spiritual, religious, ancient tradition / solidarity. So I just want to really honor that, honor everything that was said right now, and me just feeling like all of this is happening in the way it needs to happen, even though there's been just so many tragedies, so many deaths before this these recent victories in Gaza and Syria. And so I just really want to take time to uplift like all of our ancestors, all of our ancient traditions, and the many too many prayers that have been put down for many years for this to happen, and for even us to be here, but even though it's virtually, to be able to be at the same table, right? Be at the same table and process and talk like humans, respectfully and lovingly, like the way you have always been, Hussam. I've had so much deep respect for you for always being that noble, such a noble, caring, loving, compassionate person, and just yeah. And so my question, one of my questions was how like a call to action, basically, or calls to action, and more of like self-checking ourselves here in the US. And you kind of alluded to that with when you said many leftists in the US have drunk the Kool-Aid. So like how can those of us who truly from the heart want to be like in true solidarity,
Sure.
be in true solidarity, and not be like, oh, oh, the government's doing that, so we got to do what ABC against it. Like, like you said, I agree with you. That's not the solution. It's reverse oppression. It's reverse everything. And so, what's the best way for myself and others, like my sister Rosa here, to be in true solidarity and really like del corazón,
Yes.
continue to be supportive, to be in solidarity with these great victories, and without being like, oh, we know better here in the US, we're going to just do this and that. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
I don't know if anything of what I'm saying makes sense.
No, makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for your kind words and your sentiments, and they're mutual. I have nothing but love and respect for you over the years. We've worked together on immigrants' rights issues, and you've been a great sister, partner, friend, and I really appreciate that. And we're driven by the love that we do for the work we do, all of us. Thank you. And honestly, this is like the easiest audience. You guys do more than anybody else in the world to uplift humanity. So I don't need to preach to you. You can preach to an entire country, each one of you, with the work you do. But I think a reminder, maybe we can remind each other. A reminder is don't take your freedom for granted, and don't take the privilege you have, and we have, all of us have, for granted, being in America. Because much of the misery and the injustice around the world is oftentimes done in our name by our government, through our tax money. And they get away with it because they dehumanize people, whether it's people in Central America, whether it's the migrants at our border or inside our country, or Palestinians today who, had it not been for the decades of dehumanization, we wouldn't have seen a Biden, Harris, Blinken policy that continues to dismiss the killing that is happening every day. Same thing in Syria. I can tell you, 600,000 people killed in Syria. Had these people been not brown, Muslim, Arab, Syrian, the US and the West would have intervened very quickly. It's the utmost dream for an Arab today and brown Muslim or brown person is to be treated like Ukrainians. And I side by Ukrainians, don't get me wrong. I actually champion their cause, and I think Russia is wrong on this element. But that's the utmost. If I believe in reincarnation, I would say in my second life I wanna be born as a white person, right? I wanna taste and see what it feels like, right? To be treated as a human being by the West. Of course, I don't believe in reincarnation, and I'm very happy and proud to be brown and Arab and Muslim, but as a exaggerated figure of speech. So what I think each of us can do as a privilege is, one, choose not to be part of the silent majority, and you're not. So how can we take that to the others and say, let's humanize others? Because I can tell you what's going to happen. I cannot vouch for Ahmed Shara, the new de facto leader of Syria today. I've never met him. And as I said, until a couple of months ago, I was a critic in a sense. I mean, if you go on my social media, you will see me criticizing, because I prefer the other ones, which were a little bit more inclusive, less dogmatic. But I also admit to being pleasantly surprised, as I said earlier, that actually he's doing the right thing. He's doing actually better than the groups that I thought were good. He's uniting people. He has a vision of a Syria that is democratic, that is stable, harmonious, etc. I hope he sticks to it. I wish I can swear by that. I don't know. But everything indicates that direction. My worry is very soon we will be hearing from Arab governments, from Israel, and immediately after that from our own US government, the demonization of these groups and the Syrian people for their choices. They're going to say they're bad, they're extremists, they're fundamentalists, they're a threat to the West, they're a threat to minorities, they are a threat to Israel, and etc. And I would say, before we believe them or not, investigate. I don't know if that becomes the case. Yes, all of us should be vocal against that. But meaning, don't believe Western media, and I know you don't. So I'm preaching to the choir again. Don't buy what MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, or BBC is going to say. Let's dig deeper. Let's talk to the Samir Twares. Samir is way more entrenched in Syria than me. As I said, I never lived in Syria. I'm passionate about it, but Samir knows what's going on. And Samir is an honest person who risked his life and his family's life to stand for democracy, for justice, not for an ideology, truly for values. I can attest to that. I've worked with him over the years. And there are many people like Samir, hundreds of them here. So let's keep an eye and an ear open to learn what's happening. This event is a good example. Next time, let's invite Samir to give us another update, and somebody else from Syria maybe, and then see how we can help make sure that we end. There are existing sanctions today on Syria, which were placed to keep Assad from punishing and exploiting Syrians. I think there was some justification for that. Now Syrians run their show, their country. So we need for the government to lift those sanctions very quickly. So that could be another action. I'm trying to be very brief because I know there are a couple of other hands and we're getting late. So I'll end here, Jeff.
Okay, Yossi, then David Mandel, and then Rosie. What happened to Rosie?
Okay, thank you, Hussam. This how you pronounce your name, Hussam? Or...
Correct. Hussam.
Hussam.
Correct, Hussam.
Thank you so much for the enlightenment, because unfortunately it's very difficult to get the information that reflect the actual reality rather than just assumptions. And why I mean assumptions, because before the rebel took over, there already have been in the Western media and also in Israeli media that don't worry, it's going to be a bloodbath between all the groups right after they take over, and the whole country is going to be divided to pieces and endless. Everybody will fight everybody. Well, it's not happening. But I have two questions. One is how the issue of the Kurds, if any real meaningful discussion with the Kurdish minority in Syria, because they control what they're saying, like 30% of Syria or something like this. And even some US soldier there, somewhere there. This is the first question, and how, if any, negotiation going on. And the second is because I'm from Israel, and I was fighting for peace between Israel and Palestine, and also Israel and Syria. And I heard there was somebody from the new Syrian government who made a statement about they want to make peace with Israel. But is this peace mean return of the entire Golan Heights, the original Golan Heights, and another small piece that Israel occupied right after, during just before the rebel took power? And they have right now, no intention to retain at least this piece. So what actually the concrete peace message to Israel, if you return Golan Heights, will live in peace and coexistence with you? So if you can answer those two questions.
Excellent questions, Yusuf. Truly excellent questions. I'm really impressed by this group, and I say it very honestly, very, very sincerely. Like, because I give a lot of talks, and usually people stick to the very, very surface area elements. So the Kurdish situation. One thing to keep in mind, again, Kurds are not foreigners to the region. This is their home. They lived there for centuries, along with the Arabs, along with the Turks, along with the, all the groups that exist. You know, Assyrians, Chaldeans. Again, you know, since we're talking about a group that is active on the Palestinian issue, same thing as the Palestinians, same thing as the Jewish ancestral presence in the area. Like, you can't deny that, right? That these are people who historically can easily claim that presence. Now, in Syria, Kurds constitute about 9 to 10% of the total population, where the rest are Arabs. In that region, here's what people don't know. The majority of Kurds are fully integrated and assimilated in Syria. Like, some of the most prominent leaders in Syria's history, from the Mufti of the religious affairs, to the president, to prime ministers, to superior court judges, to governors, were of Kurdish origin. Because everybody in Syria is Arabized in a sense, right? Like, as I said, I'm mixed. You know, when I do my DNA test, it comes up very mixed. But everybody, because for hundreds of years, you know, since the last 1400 years, this has been an Arabized area, although originally Assyrian and maybe even originally Phoenicians, right? So even Kurds have intermarried with the region. So you go to Aleppo and you talk to families, go and look at last names. You see so many Kurdish families. And some of them don't even speak Kurdish anymore because they've lived in the region. Same thing in Damascus. You know, the latest Mufti, you know, before Hassoun, Kaftaru, very famous Kurdish person, and many. So, and they're very respected. They're not, the only tension started when the Assad regime took over, because, you know, playing on the Arab nationalism thing, restricting the rights of the Kurdish. But in the reality, it is not because they're Kurdish. The reality is because they are also Sunni Muslims. And the regime was trying to diminish the number of Sunni Muslims in Syria. So he was denying citizenship to people who are from, you know, of Kurdish background, who might have been living in suburbs for many years. Maybe they were refugees from other areas, but they came 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But the regime was trying to restrict that. So they play politics, plus the fear tactics. You know, telling the Arabs, I'm your protector because I'm the Ba'ath party, keeping the Kurds. So in general, historically speaking, there weren't tension. But what happened when the revolution started, the PKK elements, which many of them are not even from Syria, they come from outside of Syria. Many of them don't even speak Arabic. As leaders, came, and obviously with a lot of US support, I'm talking about military and financial support. And then because they controlled the oil fields of Syria, where the millions of dollars were coming in income every month. So with all of that combination, plus, again, historically speaking, Israel has had a close relationship with Kurdish nationalist separatists. Why? Because, you know, Israel has used it as a leverage against Saddam Hussein in the Kurdistan, the Iraqi Kurdistan, or against Erdogan in Turkey, or against the Iranian government, because Kurds are split up around that region, right? As you know very well. So I don't see the situation being of a big challenge for a couple of reasons. One is the region that they control today, the 30%, 25% of Syria, the overwhelming majority of that area is mostly Arab villages. So they won't have the demographics to run the show. The only reason there isn't a clash is because the new government in Syria today is holding back on any confrontation, because they're negotiating with them to make sure that they join in peacefully and they get integrated into the Syrian government and army, with the understanding that those who are not from Syria will go back to their area, not to create tension. It seems it might be heading in that direction because the US is, especially Trump, is making it clear he does not wish to involve the US in any conflict in the region. Israel is too far away from the region to be able to provide real support that is sustainable. And let's not forget, the big elephant in that region is Turkey. Turkey has the military superpower that can actually crush the PKK or the SDP, the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria, or YPG as they call them. So I'm hopeful that because the Syrian constitution of the 50s, 1950, and what's being discussed as the newly to be worked on Syrian constitution is going to guarantee respect for the diversity of Syria, religious, national origin, ethnic, etc., with decentralized government. That's what they're talking about. They want to do something that, Damascus is not choking everybody else politically, socially, culturally, allowing, because Syria's, where Samir is, it's a very unique culture, beautiful, unique culture that is very different than the people from Daraa, very different than the people from Damascus, very different than Aleppo. A lot of similarities, but each bring a rich culture that adds and enriches the Syrian mosaic. And you don't want people from Deir ez-Zor, actually Deir ez-Zor has way more commonality with the people of Iraq in that region. Yeah. The accent, the culture, the tribes, they share tribes. Very different than the people of Damascus, for example, who are a little bit more urban and so on and so forth. Each brings a unique beauty. Same thing with the Kurdish people. When you talk to people, there isn't animosity. There isn't a history of animosity. There's actually full integration, and I'm very hopeful with less, hopefully with no US negative intervention, they will find a way to address. I mean, there might be some clashes because sometimes that's the only way people pay attention. Like, okay, maybe things are changing, but I don't see an all-out war because, number one, it wouldn't be an even war, which I wouldn't like to see because it would be ugly, right? Because there's one that is way more powerful than the other. In that sense, the majority of Syria and its allies in the region. So hopefully,
actually, they were part of the Syrian Revolution since 2011 until 2016, 2017, until Trump came in and he supported the.
I would say Obama also. Obama and Trump, both.
A little bit Obama at the end, but actually, right from the beginning, they were part of the Syrian Revolution, the Kurdish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they sacrificed for the revolution. Their members were assassinated by the regime, imprisoned, killed. Same thing. They got the same misery. It is just that the problem is currently the ones who run the region, the separatist area now, are people who are actually an extension of the PKK, which have a larger regional agenda beyond Syria, and that is, the forming of a Kurdish separatist area in Turkey, which is not Syria's, the Syrian people's agenda at this point. Because, I mean, as much as I wish for everybody to have, for me, it is less about a country and a land and more about rights. Give people rights, equal say, respect for their culture. Less countries is less fight, if you ask me. I would rather have unified. That's why I support a one-state solution in Palestine and Israel, because I think focus on rights, dignity, that's much better than separate. That's a whole different story for another day. And the second question, and I will answer quickly, Yossi, is the question is how it impacts, how is peace? How do we envision peace? Yes, the governor of Damascus, the appointed governor of Damascus, during an interview, he was asked, are you interested in waging war against Israel, considering your Islamic background, Islamist background? And he made a comment. He said, our issue had been with Iran's intervention in our country. And the truth is, and later on he had to apologize because he got a lot of pushback from Syrians because he was misunderstood. What he said is Syrians are not in a position to fight anybody. Syria is destroyed. Syria's army is destroyed, economy is destroyed. It doesn't mean Syrians have no sympathy for what is happening to Palestinians or Lebanese or people anywhere else in the world. But his argument is, which I agree, Syria has no ability to fight anybody. Syria wants to have peace. Now, I don't speak for that government. I have no connection with that government, so I can't say what they have, what's on their mind. But I can say from an analyst perspective, there wouldn't be peace, even between even the peace between Egypt and Israel. Or now they're talking about possibly, there's Jordan and Israel, and now talking about Saudi Arabia and Israel. None of that peace that exists would be long-term or real or lasting or sustainable until the cause for the lack of peace is resolved. And that is the plight of the Palestinian people. So even if the Syrian government, out of fear, out of bribe, out of whatever it is, chooses to say, we'll make peace, give us back the Golan Heights, which I think they will demand it, no Syrian would allow the Golan Heights to be lost. So I can assure you, but if Israel thinks that if we offer the Golan Heights, that would lead to a lasting peace between Syria and Israel, yes, maybe on a temporary basis, but it will not diffuse the big conflict, the cause of the conflict in that region. It is not the Golan Heights, it was not the Sinai, it was not the Jordan River. It is Palestinians and their rights to live free on their land.
Yeah, but
That's true.
the peace with Egypt lasts for 40 years, so nothing wrong with it.
Yes, but I'll tell you, it's a fake peace because it's a peace between a dictatorial government and Israel. Meaning, what we want to achieve is the peace of the people. I want people to say, I mean, there shouldn't be. I mean, a couple of you said you're from Israel. I have no issue because your nationality is not my issue. I have an issue with those who support the occupation, whether they're Israeli or Arab, right?
Yes.
For me, and I want for people to be this way, like in the region where they see each other as neighbors. We can do business with each other because the cause of that conflict, which was never religion, which was never nationality, which was never a skin color, it was a political injustice that exists. If we remove that, we can have that. Yalla. Next time.
Okay, David Mandel.
Hello, Hussam. How are you doing? Good to
Very
see
good. Good to see you, my friend.
Thanks very much. It's been really enlightening. You kind of answered part of my questions in the whole last bit, but I want to get to you're talking about your quarrel with the left, or at least parts of the left, who I think I agree with you, caricature states that stand up to some degree to the United States as being anti-imperialist and therefore worthy of support, and the only evil in the world is U.S. imperialism, and that is clearly an exaggeration and a caricature. On the other hand, I think the real the ultimate source of the conflicts, the mess, the oppressions, the wars over the last 100 years in that area, or even more, and in other parts of the world as well, in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia, has been the drive for colonialism, which is very much driven by the development of European capitalism and the subsequent neo-colonialism, in which certain local leaders were co-opted and people were divided, and Kurdistan's the perfect example. So I just want to, I'm not really pushing back against what you said, but I just think it's important to recognize that, I mean, and one of the prime examples was a few years back, the United States was happy to use Assad to participate in its so-called war on terror, what they called extraordinary rendition, to take prisoners who came from the United States or from Canada and put them in prison and torture them in Syria in alliance with the CIA. I mean, so it's obviously really messy, but I do think that it's important to recognize that the whole drive and march of colonialism, imperialism, which has to do with trying to get control of resources in the region we're talking about, oil and gas in particular, has been such a driving force, and that while some of the left creates caricatures, there is something to that as well, and it's very much behind a lot of the continuing conflict that we see today, and they'll pick whatever side they think temporarily serves their interests, and the following year it can be somebody else. But in that context, I just want to ask, and even the creation of the nation states in the area, which happened very much right during and right after World War I, Sykes-Picot and subsequent things that happened of the League of Nations, the mandate for Palestine, creation of the Jewish state, was all mixed up with that. And I think if that hadn't been a factor, there probably would have been more of what you just mentioned a couple minutes ago, a much more democratic United States of the region, where you wouldn't have these hard borders which themselves give rise to conflict, and where the Kurdish people could have real expression of their culture and their politics, not necessarily having a Kurdish state, just as we don't necessarily need a Jewish state, but an alliance of all the huge and diverse mosaic of peoples that you've been talking about. And I guess ultimately the question I want to ask is is there a future where that might actually happen, and what can we do over the long term to help make that happen? I mean, my answer is we need to fight for real democracy and against all the forces of U.S. dominance and capitalism in this country as Americans. But is there a prospect that if we can somehow work together on that project, that could happen, that we could overcome the nation state?
Yeah, I would say I love that topic itself, not just the question, because that's way deeper than a question. And I would love, maybe I'll recommend for Jeff, maybe to make it a topic for one of those upcoming next discussions. And I would love to participate, joining whoever. But very quickly, David, and I know we're running out of time, and I want to leave time for Jeff to make his comments also. I 100% agree with you, with everything you said. I never underestimated or, reduced the issues of Western imperialism, the US, the UK, France. I've spent much of my life dealing with that. What I'm saying, what I said is that the US and the West are not the only imperialists that need to be condemned. Russia has played imperialist role in Afghanistan, in Central Asia, in Syria, in Libya now. China plays an imperialist role and colonialist role against the Uyghur people, against others in the region, threatening them. Iran plays an imperialist role. Like every country has, so it can't only be we only hate American imperialism. Like we're okay with the Russian imperialism. Like no, you either stand for humanity or you don't. I don't care who's the source of that inhumanity. And I know you agree with me. I'm not pushing back. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misunderstood. Like clearly, we want to make sure that that's what my issue was with the some, actually, to be fair, many US leftists took a very honorable position on the issue of Syria, and to their credit, just for those who didn't. Very briefly on the other point, yes, I think continuing to focus on democracy, because nothing resolves these issues better than democracy, and a democracy that protects the rights of minorities, not just absolute democracy with yes, then otherwise minorities would be eliminated. So a democracy that actually considers the rights of minorities, focusing on human rights, whether it's in Israel, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Syria, anywhere else, will help us create that. I can tell you there is a shift in the region towards, at least among the Arab people, finally seeing that, wait a minute, we've been the victims of this Sykes-Picot colonialist project. How much power do they have? I don't think that much power they have to change that until, I'll tell you, it's illegal now in most of the Arab countries to talk about unifying, right? Because then you will be considered to be globalizing politics, and then you'll be you'll either be called Arab nationalist or Islamist or Brotherhood or jihadist. You're not allowed to talk about something that has to do with unity across the board. What stops people in that region from having an EU, right? Like government. EU is, I don't think there's any group that is more different than Europeans, and yet they were able to get together and form that. It's going to take long. I mean, I hope they do it for the sake of the people of the region, because I think it will allow people to be themselves, whether it's the Jewish people, the Kurdish people, the Arab people, the Armenian people who live there. I mean, I don't want anybody to leave. I think, look, we live here, we find peace, we disagree, we argue, we vote, but at the end of the day, we try to make it work for everybody. And then, it's a process. It's not an end goal. But I'll hold myself to allow. Samir, I think it looks like you have a lot to say on this topic.
The key is democracy.
Yeah.
When those Arab countries and the Middle East have democracy, then they can be like the European Union. They can unite. They can do whatever. Democracy 100%. Is the key.
European
and democracy
too, but yeah.
Also democracy, that means also the end of Arab-Israeli conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Democracy, what the Syrian Revolution is bringing. So there is hope. David, you asked about if there is hope. Now there is hope because the Syrian Revolution won. So the Arabs everywhere, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Egypt, everywhere, they are looking for how Syria is gonna develop and how it's gonna build its own democracy. Now the Syrian people are free.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody. I have a little question. I was unbelievably encouraged by your assessment that HTS is trying to do the right thing and trying to be inclusive. That's what it looked like right in the beginning, and you worry about that. But that's real encouraging. I'm not asking you to make any predictions for the future, but I want to ask about Iran, Turkey, and Israel. These are three countries that surround Syria, and they all have their fingers in the pot. And Turkey is a supporter of HTS, so they're sort of the biggest. And so HTS is trying to run a good show. The trouble is they might be undermined by Iran, Turkey, Israel, either alone or together, to say nothing of the rest of the world. So I'd like you to comment on each one, Iran, Turkey, and Israel vis-a-vis Syria. And especially with Israel, if I was the head of Israel, I would want a good, stable government next door. But Israel seems to want a failed state next door. And I just don't understand that. So anyway, if you could talk about that in the few minutes we have left. And then at the very end, David Mandel is going to make a short plea for us to be democratic or something like that. Okay, take it away, Hussam.
Sure, very quickly. Each country has its own interest. Governments don't run as nonprofits or charitable organizations. So there's no surprise, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Sometimes you have a good agenda, sometimes bad agenda, sometimes mixed. But I'll tell you, over the past 14 years, for the Syrian people at least, Turkey has played a supportive role. It doesn't mean it's sincere, God knows, I can't tell what's in their heart, but has helped the Syrian people in a sense. Now I can say, it is in Turkey's interest that there is a stable, unified Syria, territorially unified. Again, for the reason I talked about, the fear of a Kurdish separatist, secessionist, movement in Syria. If Syria gets divided, the little, whatever enclave is formed by the Kurdish people would definitely be detrimental to Turkey's unity and unified territory and all of that. So Turkey, whatever its motives, has good reasons to keep Syria unified. Now, it's even better if that, by the way, just to put things in perspective, Turkey's government had a good working relationship with the Assad regime. It wasn't a big fan, but before the revolution started, it actually managed to ease up some of the tension that existed over the past decades. Finding a, one is the government in Turkey is more Islamically leaning government and sees itself as the protector of the Palestinian people. Syria was seen as an ally, again. So there was that level, but when the revolution started, it became impossible for the Turkish government to be seen as friends of the Assad regime, considering the many other cultural factors. People in northern Syria and people in southern Turkey share a lot of culture, a lot of, not just the land, geography, but also the history. And there are a lot of people who speak Turkish in northern Syria, and a lot of people speak Arabic in southern Turkey. So there is that extension, historic, religious culture. Turkey is for the most part a Muslim, Sunni also for the most part, especially in that region of Turkey. So there is that extension. There's sympathy. The Turkish people are very sympathetic. Forget about the government. Very sympathetic to the Syrian people. Turkey hosted 4 to 5 million Syrians at the detriment of Turkey itself. The economy, even the ruling party almost lost elections several times, from presidential to parliament to municipal, because it was seen as the one that brought all these Syrian immigrants to Turkey. So the opposition used the card of Syrian refugees the way our own right conservative parties do it here, right? Same thing, same language, very xenophobic. Syrians are blah, 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 stealing our jobs. They're thieves, they're rapists. I visited Turkey and I saw some of these very nationalistic groups acting that way. So, but, with the exception of that group of people, Turks, so it is, even from a political perspective, it is a good thing for the ruling party, the AKP, the AK party, to actually champion Syrians because it looks good in front of their constituency. So I think, regardless of the intentions, if we just judge by political expediency, Turkey has interest in keeping Syria unified and under the rule of HTS, although, by the way, HTS was not the closest ally of Turkey. The other groups, the one I was talking about, were
the
ones.
national
Exactly. But Turkey is quick to adapt and realize that they're the ones in charge and they're workable. So immediately kind of embraced them, worked with them. So they have the interest. Now, Iran is a different situation. Iran does not share a border. The larger border, I mean, one of the largest border, I think, correct me, Samir, the longest border between Syria is between Turkey, not Iraq, right?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
right.
So,
Yes.
I mean, just the
Yes.
exact distance.
Yes.
Also, it's large enough with Jordan, it's large enough with Iraq, and a little bit with Lebanon, and a little bit with Palestine and Israel. But, which means, there is a lot of influence. Now, Iran does not share a border, direct border, indirectly through Iraq, which is a proxy state nowadays to Iran for the most part. So Iran is too weak to make a major influence in the region now. It got beaten badly in the region. Its biggest proxy, Hezbollah, got beaten badly, and we saw the impact of that on Lebanon. Already, the new president in Lebanon, the new prime minister, are from the other camp, not the pro-Iran one, not the pro-Hezbollah one. I think the role of Hezbollah in Iran is going to shrink drastically in Lebanon. It's not going to disappear because there's a large, substantial Lebanese Shia community that is pro-Iran. So, and it's not healthy to force them out. I mean, they're part and parcel of
It
the
will
country.
turn a political party.
Yeah, exactly. So there will be a weakening of its political influence, which also would mean a weakening of its intervention in Lebanon, in Syria, I'm sorry, for Hezbollah. So I think Iran is going to try to undermine. Iran is still trying to undermine. Iran is actually even appealing to the West on playing the card of these are Islamist, again, remember, HTS coming from the, offshoot of Al-Qaeda, playing all the buzzwords, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Islamist, Sunni, Islamist, jihadist. These are the buzzwords the West pays attention. When there are two things they pay attention to, oil and Islamist. So that's what they immediately come in and try to intervene. So I don't think they're going to stop, but their influence is weakened. Israel, on the other hand, I would say, has a lot of interest. You ask Jeff why, it makes sense for Israel to have a stable neighbor. Not really. Israel prefers to divide Syria into at least 3, maybe more states. Now, the region in the Golan or the Julan area in Syria and the occupied Julan by Israel is heavily Druze. Druze are their own religious sect. They're an offshoot of Islam, offshoot of Shia Islam, but they don't call themselves Muslim in a sense. They call themselves Druze as a separate group.
And
And
they are
they're
Arab.
heavy, and they're Arabs. Israel is trying to kind of appeal to the Druze of Syria, telling them, listen, we give Druze of Golan in Israel and other parts of Israel rights, and you will be your own king in your own neighborhood. You will be the big fish in the small pond. There will allow you to have your own separate state or maybe your self-rule. And there have been some pressure, some kind of inclination, some talks about that. I think the majority of the Druze they want to be part of Syria. They've talked about it. Their leadership has talked about it. So I hope Israel's plan fails. So far, it seems like it's failing. But Israel has talked about it. Netanyahu met, it's no secret. You can read about it. They talked about dividing Syria into 3 areas. One, the Kurdish area. One, the Arab area in the middle, and then the Druze area in the south. I hope it doesn't. I mean, obviously, why is Israel doing that? What is the take for Israel? For Israel, it deprives Palestinians from their organic, natural extension supporter, right? Even if it's just symbolic, moral. Because the whole goal is to choke the Palestinians emotionally, psychologically, not just militarily and economically and politically. It is basically bring Palestinians to the brink of giving up. You're alone. Egyptians have let you down. Everybody has given up on you. Now you have to submit to whatever Israel gives you. And not having a strong neighbor. I mean, if I were Israel and if I were, the aggressive Netanyahu government, yeah, I want to see all countries around me weakened, whether it's Egypt or, it's evil, wrong, but that's how governments operate, right? So, I wouldn't feel confident that it's the threat or the risks are over. Actually, if anything, I think everybody was taken by surprise by the speed by which the Assad regime fell. I think everybody now is regrouping, including the US, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Israelis, the Iranians, etc. The only ones who know the players are the Turks, because they've been dealing with those in the north for the last 14 years. Everybody else now is regrouping who their allies are on the ground and how they're going to play them against each other, how they're going to arm them. That's why I'm hopeful. I think Syrians are aware of what is being planned, but money, intelligence agencies, we've seen them play roles in we've seen them, fail the Arab Revolution or the Freedom Revolution in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Yemen, in every place where there was an Arab Spring success, they turned it into a major failure. So I hope Syria would be the only success that will lead to other success.
Hey, I want to thank Hussam, and I also want to thank Samir for his important contributions. And our guests like Claudia and several others who are not regulars, I say, if you email me, I'll put you on the mailing list so we have these things once a month. And before we sign off, David has a request.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll make this really quick because we've been going for more than 2 hours already. There is an election coming up within the Democratic Party. I've been involved in this for a long time. Hussam has been involved in it for a long time. I think you're running again now. And Esty, who's on the call, has also been. This is to elect members of the Central Committee of the California Democratic Party. I think they deliberately make it a confusing process, so I'm not going to try to explain it here. But the bottom line is not a whole lot of people come out to vote in these elections, so every vote can really make a difference. And I'm putting in the chat the one, here it goes there. This website will give you the explanation. This is a statewide group that I've been working with. The elections are by assembly district, so probably your people here are in a number of different assembly districts. But if you go there, you can find who are the endorsed progressive, pro-Palestine candidates in your assembly district and take part. And the final word is that the easiest way to do it is to vote online. And in order to do that, you have to register online by January 31st, which is...
You mean register to be a member of the Democratic Party?
You have to be registered as a Democrat, but you can still do that if you're not. And you can change back to whatever you want a week later for all I care.
Is that for California, for the state of California?
This is for the
Maybe that's like conversion from Judaism to some other kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah,
A temporary conversion to the Democratic swamp. And a lot of people are...
No, is it for only Los Angeles or California you're talking about?
The whole state of California.
The whole state.
People are fed up with the Democratic Party, including me. But I think it's a place that's worthwhile carrying on this fight for democracy, for end to the corruption of our political system, for freedom for Palestine, for Syria, for everybody else, and for a whole range of truly progressive issues in this country. So,
so you're running for chair?
But I can donate money if you collect money yourself.
Yeah, okay.
You're running for chair of the...
I'm not running for anything right now because I'm already a member of the Central Committee through my county, which is a whole story that I won't get into, but there are 80 assembly districts, 14 people are elected in each one. That's a third of the full Central Committee. And if we can win a lot of those, it can really make a difference in the politics of the Democratic Party and thereby broader. So go to that website. That'll explain more what it's about. Register as a Democrat if you choose to, and if you're not already, change back later if you want. But register to vote online by January 31st. And all the instructions you can find on that website, including who to vote for in your district. So thanks for listening to that. And
Jeff, can you send it in the email? So
yeah,
I can take a look at it?
I could write a little bit of a longer explanation. Maybe Jeff can send it out to your list.
I will put out within 2 hours, I'll put out the recording. And I've already included the CARE website in the recording and in that email, and I'll do this, and anything you send me in the next hour or an hour and a half, I'll put in.
Okay.
Good.
So I thank everyone, especially Hussam, who gave a masterful presentation of the history and the politics and the ins and outs. And I actually, my mother is a Syrian.
Thank you very much.
In Syria, she was born in Ottoman Palestine, which was the Syrian province of the Ottoman Empire, and her family comes from Beirut and Damascus. So I'm a sort of Syrian too. Thank everybody.
There was a quick question from Uri. I just noticed it now. And Samir, you're the historian here on the record. He asked, any of the recent presidents in Syria was of Kurdish. I know Shishakli was of Kurdish origin. Correct me, and Sillo. I think Sillo was also one of the short-term was a president.
I wasn't sure that Adib Shishakli was, but I remember him as a kid growing up because he's got a funny name. Sounds very funny in Hebrew. So,
and there were others too. I mean, I can't remember, but I know maybe also.
I didn't think that al-Attasi family was not Kurdish. They were like from Homs, I think.
They're from Homs. Very prominent
from Hama. From Hama.
Yeah.
I think they're prominent Homsi, if I'm not mistaken. Attasi,
Al-Attasi,
Attasi from Homs, But Shishakli, Hama.
Shishakli, Hama, Kurdish Hama,
Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Sorry
very much. It was an amazing presentation.
Thank you, my friends. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you. Good night,
everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you.